So the first thing I did today was look at making 4 scout badges into badges that were um, able to be taken on and off with a safety pin on the back, rather than as with a typical scout badge you just sew it straight onto the jacket or item of clothing where it's going to be sitting on. Um, and I needed them to be removable, as they'll be for Ivanka and Marina, who at the end of Loserville they are wearing scout badges to show how Francis has become kind of cool, I guess, how the geeks are now cooler. So they've been inspired by his scout badges on his clothes and want to emulate that. But they don't have them at the start of the show, so I made them removable. To do that, I cut out a piece of black felt, approximately the same size as the badge, a little bit smaller, so it wouldn't be seen over the edge, and I sewed around it using the very edge of the badge to attach it to, and I used a whip stitch to do that. And I sewed the safety pin onto the felt first, so I didn't have to worry about my needle or my stitches being seen on the other side of the badge. So I did 4 of those total, and then I looked at adding a bit more definition to the tops for the sci-fi scene that were made out of the tablecloth. Only one of them, the one that I started making from scratch, because the other one was fine as it was, and I wanted to make the one that I had made look a bit more like that one. So to do that, I used some black acrylic paint and a sponge to put to cover the top in black paint. And the reason I used a sponge was because I didn't want to turn it black. What I wanted to do was just get it into the grooves more, like, so it adds more definition to the pattern, and a bit more variety to the tablecloth, because the tablecloth pattern is these geometrical shapes made from grooves in the tablecloth. So I was using the black to kind of push those details out a bit more. And then once I'd done that, I went back over it with a bit more silver spray paint, just to make it more silver than black, because the silver is like the main part of it, and that matches the rest of the sci-fi scene better than if it's more silver, but it's just a bit more detailed than it was before. And then I started looking at making shin pads for 2 of the ensemble members in the sci-fi scene. To do that, I used Foshape. There was an example of one that I found in the costume room that I used for to find the shape that I needed. So I replicated the shape, and I cut around that out of Foshape, and I ironed it. I used steam from the iron to make it harden, and in a sort of more curved shape. The reason I used Foshape is because it is stiff whilst being sort of malleable. It can hold itself in its shape, but it has enough flexibility that it doesn't need to fit exactly, be the exact right shape for the actor's leg, so it's more forgiving than if I was to make it out of, say, cardboard, but it isn't as flimsy as that either. So then I painted them grey, and I mixed the grey myself using white and black, so that when I painted it there was more variety in the tones, so it didn't look quite so flat, as if I just used one solid grey. I used a few different tones to make it a bit more interesting, and then I put them aside to dry. And once they dried, I added elastic on the sides, with one piece longer as the top of the shin is wider, one piece smaller because the bottom is smaller. I added poppers um, on both ends of the elastic and on one side of the shin pad, just to make it easier for getting on and off the actor's leg, because pulling it over, you'd have to worry about if it would fit over their foot or not. So I felt this was just a simpler solution. And I then looked at making an applique space alien patch kind of thing for a cloak or a cape. So that would be for another ensemble member in the sci-fi scene. So to do that, I drew out some pieces on dot and cross paper of what I wanted to cut out of the material I had. And so once I decided on a design, then I cut that out of the material, and I saved the paper because there's a second cape that I want to make the same pattern out of, and then I placed that on the cape and I sewed it on. I think what I would do differently with that is to pin it more for the next one, because I used very few pins and I didn't use any bond web or anything. I just kind of went for it, and it did work out quite well, but I think it was maybe more stressful and needed maybe a bit more time on it than if I'd taken the time to pin it and make it a bit neater. Something that is easier when sewing applique directly onto the cape than with the smaller, more intricate badges that I worked on is that it won't get caught in the machine in the same way, because the cape is stopping it from getting jammed, having that layer in between, whereas with the patches I didn't have that. So that's something to keep in mind, so I know I can, if I need to, I can really do the corners properly, as I had to avoid that quite a bit with the smaller patches. And I think something I will try to do with the next one is get closer to the edges of that material, because I was giving it too much of a wide berth, because I didn't want it to get jammed in the machine. But it turns out that wasn't a problem like it was for the other patches. So it's good to know that. So that'll make me be able to make it a bit neater in the next one. I also looked at spray painting some balls like I did on the headbands a few weeks ago for the sci-fi scene, except I cut them in half and I then spray painted them silver. On the first lot, a lot of them you could still see through the original colour that they were, so I used a layer of acrylic paint just to make the surface less smooth and give the paint something more to grip onto, so it wouldn't just run off like it had been doing. And that worked a lot better, and the coverage was a lot more solid. And so as they were in half, I used them to decorate both the tops that I made for the sci-fi scene and also the shin pads. The shin pads, I also want to add some buttons and some more bottle tops, but I will need to find the bottle tops first and also make them all a different colour. And I looked at decorating the red long sleeve that would be used in the sci-fi convention scene. It was already had some elements of it, like the tablecloth that I used to make the other two sci-fi tops. It had that, but it was quite plain. On the sides it just had one button in the middle, so I started adding some more details to that with some bottle tops and the walls.